Hey everyone, Bradley tuning in, and today I want to talk about how to save for a house. Now, 37% of people expect their parents to help them buy their first home. But if that's not you, then this video is for you because I want to talk about how to apply and save that money for your down payment and eventually qualify when you go to apply. But before I get started, my name is Bradley Watson. We do videos just like this every week, keep you up to date in the real estate market. And I'm excited to bring you this content. Make sure you hit that subscribe button if you're getting value out of some of our videos. I'm actually in a subscribe race right now with my dad. We're using hashtag RecDad10K. You can put that in the comments below. But as an incentive to get to that 10,000 subscriber race, I'm going to also offer a $100 Amazon gift card as a gift to anyone in the 1,000 subscribers. Once we hit that number, you're going to be entered into a raffle and you could win it. If you want to check out my dad's channel and get to know a little bit about what he's doing over there, his channel is called Beyond the Tool Belt, and I'll also link that up above. So let me share a little bit about my story. Now, I am a realtor and an investor, but where did I start out? Well, as I grew up, I was actually in a single parent home. I'm a first generation university student. I actually took business finance and I paid for it myself. And now today, of course, I own a beautiful home, but where did we get there and why do I have an angle, this unique angle, as you'll kind of see in the strategy that I use? But I bought my first home when I was 23. My wife and I at the time, I'm still happily married to Sandra. We now have a beautiful daughter as well. But we invested $40,000 and over a matter of 3 years, we were able to convert that into $1.87 million in real estate assets and really build our portfolio from the ground up. And all of this comes from establishing that savings. You don't need to be rich in order to obtain this mass of equity, but you definitely have to have a strategy. And that's what I want to talk about today. This story is all about sacrifices. When I bought my first home, I lived in the basement. So this whole idea that you're going to buy this dream home right off the hop or get into investment properties are great. But the question is what are you prepared to sacrifice in order to get there? And it really outlines into two categories. What is your target? In other words, how are you going to get this down payment and get this mortgage? And then also having a plan to save. When you go to apply for a mortgage, this is our target. This is what we're essentially aiming for. Unless you have all the cash in the world to buy straight out of the gate, we're going to need to be able to qualify. So this is kind of our end game. Now, they're going to look at a few things. First off is your credit score. Now, if you're sitting around a 680, that's enough to qualify for an A lender. The ideal scenario would be have a 750. Now, I know these numbers seem out of the ordinary, but you can actually check out what your credit score is on Equifax.com. You're able to run that report once a year. The purpose is to kind of make sure that there's nothing funny going on and that your credit is actually still protected, but you can use this to figure out what your current credit standing is if you're planning to build from there. Step 2 is our net income. Now what they do, this is actually where it becomes a little bit more challenging for people who are self-employed because what they're asking for when you're applying for a mortgage is to see that consistency over the last 2 years. They're going to ask for what's called an NOA, a notice of assessment, and which is essentially your tax return over the last couple of years. So for me, when I bought my first property, I was also working a full-time job, which helped me qualify for the mortgage beyond also Sandra working because we went into it together. However, I was also in the real estate business and doing okay, but if I just considered that as my income, it wouldn't have been sufficient. So instead what we do is I actually sucked it up. This is part of the sacrifice. You suck it up, you hold that job, and I actually quit my job within a month of closing on my property. And we were also getting married at the end of the year, but we were confident in what we had. We had a budget, we had a plan, but at the same time we needed to show this consistent cash flow coming in the form of pay. And the other angle to this, and to show that stability as well, is my third point, which is your job letters or your bank statements. You're going to want to see these things because they're going to want to make sure that you've got that consistent cash flow. Sometimes what happens is people will get a whole injection of cash, and if you don't have a note to back it up, for example, it's from my parents, then they're going to want to know what's going on because they don't want to make sure, they don't want you just to get a bonus all of a sudden and then not have that consistent ability to pay the mortgage down the road. They're really trying to paint a picture of who you are and what you bring and will continue to bring before they're lending you the money. A couple other really interesting points. When a bank is lending you money, the most they're prepared to give you is 42% total debt service ratio, which is a fancy way of saying out of all of the expenses that you have, they don't want more than 42% of that going into your mortgage payments. And another fun fact, and why I was able to get into real estate in the way that I did, and what many people are taking advantage of, is when you actually have rental income coming in, 50% of that in a rental property counts towards your net income. So you're actually able to boost that up. However, if you actually live in the home, if you're primary residence as well, you can actually take in 100% of that income as counting towards showing that you can continue to make the payments, which is a really great opportunity. Which brings me to down payment. There's this whole controversy between whether you should have more than 20% or less. And the reason is this. There's this thing called CMHC insurance, or PMI, which is additional insurance needed if you're putting under 20% down on the purchase of your home. The reason for this is any lender is covered up to 80% by the government, but if you're going to go a little bit beyond that, there's additional risk being taken by the lender, and therefore you're going to pay for it. And it costs you between 0.5% to 3% of the purchase price or the lending amount on that home. And so we want to consider, is this enough for us to wait? When I bought my first home, I put 10% down, and which worked out very well because we were in a climbing real estate market. And therefore it made sense, and I didn't want to wait. In fact, if I waited, I probably to this day would still be fighting just to get into that first property. However, for some people, if you have 20%, this is a great way for you to avoid those additional fees that many Canadians and Americans across the world are paying in this additional insurance component, and you can easily avoid it. When it comes to borrowing money, the banks don't want to lend you any more than 42% TDS, total debt service ratio. And this is a fancy way of saying out of all the money that you've got coming in, you're spending, they don't want more than 42% of that going towards the mortgage, which makes sense because they want to make sure you can afford it. But there's a really fun feature that you have if you are getting into the investments in property space, where you can actually associate 50% of that income coming in the form of rent towards income for yourself in qualifying. And even more beautiful, if you live in the home and rent a portion of the home, you can actually claim 100% of that income towards your income when you're going to apply for a mortgage. So these are factors you want to keep in mind. But when it comes to really qualifying, the big thing they're looking for is that down payment. And this huge battle between whether you should have 20% or more or less than 20%. And it makes a big difference because of this thing called PMI or CMHC insurance. Now, when a lender is giving money out, they can give up to 80%, and the government will actually help protect that. It's kind of a safe spot for them. But if you go beyond that, so maybe you only put 10% down, there's an additional 10% risk on that lender, and so they charge that back to you as the borrower. So in order to avoid the CMHC, which can cost you between 0.5% anywhere to 3% of your borrowing costs, your borrowing loan amount, we want to make sure that we're factoring that in, because it might be worthwhile waiting if we're close to that 20% just to get there before we put in an offer on a property. On the flip side, it might make sense to pay that and add that to the purchase price of your home in order to get in the market sooner if you're in a climbing real estate market, which is actually what I did when I bought my first property, knowing that I could easily carry it and that'd be a way to get in the market, which today I would still probably be fighting to get into if I hadn't taken that slight risk but calculated all the same. We want to have this idea of how much going in that we need to have saved. In fact, 42% of millennials say that they overspent when they bought their home. So now we've got this target. We know what our down payment is. How can we go about intentionally saving the money? And all of these points come down to one thing, which is a mindset shift. You got to make sure that you know you're focused, you're disciplined, and you've got this target in mind. And some of these strategies are really cool ways to conquer this giant, which is saving for a home, but we got to really be intentional. And the first thing that I would say is we want to make sure that we remove any credit card debt. What's the point in earning 15 to 20% if you can even attain 20% in this type of real estate market when you're going to pay 20% in interest in another and on the other hand? So it doesn't really make sense. The next thing is your spouse or your partner. You want to make sure you're on the same page. And as well, this whole idea of sacrificing. Now, there's a few ways that we can sacrifice, and it really is up to you. The first option that is widely marketed and widely sold, if you look up how to save money for a house on YouTube and online, you will find people saying to pinch pennies in the way of reducing your bills, reducing the cost of living, reducing your meals and entertainment, which are all great things, especially if you're splurging. But I'll be honest, I'm the type of person that splurges as well, and I think this is partly why I have a different approach to this, one that I think is actually better. The way that I look at this is as I grow, as my career progresses, my income will also grow. And we're really looking at that balance between income expenses. Those of you who know me know that even to this day, my wife and I share a vehicle. We're able to make it work. And as well, when I bought my first property, I was really only spending $500 a month in rent. And the reason was because I had a tenant paying the upper level. So as much as I now bought a home, I was still sacrificing in this way. My expenses didn't necessarily increase at the speed that my income did, and therefore I was able to bank all of that money. Which takes me to number 4, which is being able to track your wealth. There's a great application, especially if you have various bank accounts, called mint.com. You should check it out, and you can actually consolidate them all and see where you stand. But the big thing here is that you know your net worth at any given point. Even if that's just grabbing a piece of paper and calculating what are your assets, what are your liabilities, and where do you stand today. Which takes me to number 5, which is yourself. Pay yourself first. When I make money, even today, there's this idea that comes from a great book which you should check out called The Wealthy Barber, and this idea that the money comes to you before it goes out. So in my case, 10% of that right off the hop goes into this saving, this kitty that I have reserved specifically for real estate investment and other investment vehicles. As well, if you check any of the great minds out there, many of them give away 10% right off the top. In my case, I share with my church. And then I put money aside for taxes, especially as a self-employed person. I actually put aside 40%. But if you're getting that deducted from you in your business, you don't have to worry about that. The remaining balance, only after these things have happened, that is the money that you have to spend, and that is what you use for your expenses. So those are some of the big ways that you can be saving money, but I also wanted to have room for these creative ideas that I really love depending on your situation. The first one is RRSP home buyer plans, or RRSP loans. Now, if you have a lot of income coming in, you should really be leveraging this RRSP loan, which is borrowing money in order to put it into this RRSP. At the end of the year, when you file, it's considered reduced off your income, and that amount of money you can actually dump back onto this loan, which gets you in a lot faster. If you yourself are applying, even if you have RSPs, you can borrow as an individual up to $25,000, and as a couple, $50,000 on the purchase of your first home, which I absolutely love. But maybe you're on the other side, maybe your income's not as high and you're looking for a strategy. Consider this. Many municipalities and even the provincial government offer money to people who are buying their first home in the low income segment, which is a great platform for you to get into a market. And I'm telling you, there's thousands of dollars just waiting for you when you go to purchase your first home. Which takes me, if you don't fall into either of these kind of far ends, is that right in the middle is this idea of paying your mortgage today. There's no point waiting for you to get a mortgage when you're paying rent today. Why not calculate what your mortgage payment would be, that potentially 42% of your spending? Take your rent and subtract that, and whatever's left over, that money that would have gone into a mortgage, you start plugging that away into savings and getting very intentional about putting money aside to purchase that first home. As you can see, there are many ways for you to save money and buy that home. But as the old adage goes, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. So my advice to you is stay thirsty, my friends. Make sure you hit that like button. We're going to continue to put out great content here in the GTA real estate market. I'll see you guys next week. And also answer the question down below and share with the rest of us, how would you go about saving money to either buy a home or just in general? I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care and keep it real.